At Maplewood Academy, in the heart of a vibrant city in Texas, Career Week had finally arrived. It was one of those special times in the school year when the routine of endless textbooks, assignments, and class periods was replaced with excitement and curiosity. Each year, parents would visit the classrooms to speak about their careers, bringing with them props that spoke to their expertise. Stethoscopes, medical tools, blueprints, and laptops. It was the kind of day that left kids wide-eyed and excited to learn about the world of work beyond their own understanding. The students of Mrs. Thompson's third-grade class, full of young energy and anticipation, could hardly wait. For 8-year-old Elijah Carter, this day meant more than just a break from the regular school routine. His father, Dr. Jonathan Carter, a respected aerospace engineer, had promised to come in and share about his work. Dr. Carter had been working on a cutting-edge satellite communication project for NASA, and Elijah could barely contain his excitement. Elijah was a sharp and inquisitive boy, small for his age, but possessing an intellect far beyond his years. He had an eager way of speaking, as if each word he shared held importance. He was especially proud of his dad and the work he did at NASA. As the class gathered on the colorful reading rug, Elijah couldn't help but sit up straighter, knowing that in just a few hours, his father would walk through the door in a NASA badge, showing the class what it truly meant to work in space exploration. When Mrs. Thompson asked the class to go around the room and share what their parents did for a living, Elijah's chest puffed up with pride. "My dad," he said, his voice filled with excitement, "works at NASA." The words, though simple, seemed to hang in the air, waiting for some kind of response. There was a brief pause, and then the laughter started. Not the kind of laugh that came from surprise or amusement, but the kind that came from disbelief, mockery, and doubt. One boy near the back of the room snickered loudly, while another muttered under his breath, "Yeah, right?" But it was Mrs. Thompson's response that hit hardest. Mrs. Thompson, in her early 40s, with her neatly pressed blouse and quiet demeanor, let out a chuckle that didn't feel warm or encouraging. It was the kind of laugh that made you feel smaller, like your words didn't matter. "NASA, huh," she said, her eyebrows raised as if Elijah had just claimed his father built rockets in their backyard. "That's quite the imagination. Elijah, maybe next time we aim for something more realistic." The laughter continued, and the words hung in the air, cutting through Elijah's pride like a sharp blade. One girl repeated the words under her breath, "More realistic," as if they were in on the joke. Elijah didn't say another word. His enthusiasm drained in an instant. His hands, which had been animated as he spoke moments before, now clenched into small, frustrated fists in his lap. His shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the world had just been placed on them. Mrs. Thompson moved on, continuing the activity as if nothing had happened. She didn't notice the way Elijah's spirit had deflated, nor the way he seemed to shrink in on himself. His classmates moved on, but Elijah stayed frozen, staring down at the rug, his sneakers tapping quietly against the floor. Mila, a quiet and empathetic girl who sat next to Elijah, leaned in and whispered, "I believe you." Elijah didn't respond. He simply nodded, eyes still fixed on the carpet. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Other kids shared their parents' careers. A doctor, a baker, a firefighter. Parents came in with smiles, props, and stories, and they received applause and gratitude. Elijah barely noticed. All he could think about was how quickly his pride had been shattered. At lunch, Elijah didn't touch his sandwich. He didn't laugh at the jokes or join in the playful games the other boys were having. His mind kept replaying the moment, the laughter, and Mrs. Thompson's dismissive words. How could she think he was lying? His dad really did work at NASA. He had the badge, the projects, the expertise to back it up, but none of that mattered right now. Elijah's father, Dr. Jonathan Carter, was an aerospace engineer who had spent the last year working on a project that would enable communication between Earth and a Mars rover. His job was intense, but his dedication to his work never stopped him from spending quality time with Elijah. They had spent hours in their garage together, cleaning out old cables and discussing space. His father had a calm presence, a quiet genius, and Elijah had always looked up to him. But now, that connection felt distant. The world outside had made Elijah question everything he had once taken pride in. 3 days before Career Week, Elijah had been in the garage with his father, sitting on a milk crate with a Capri Sun in his hand. He'd been listening intently as his dad explained how the rover communicated with Earth, how it took minutes, sometimes even 20, to receive a signal due to the vast distance between Mars and Earth. Elijah had asked the questions, but his dad had always been patient, explaining everything in simple terms. So, it's like texting someone with bad service, right? Elijah had asked, to which his father laughed and nodded. Exactly. Space has terrible Wi-Fi. Those were the moments Elijah cherished. Simple, unspoken moments with his dad. They weren't filled with speeches or grand lessons, just little, funny explanations that made the hard stuff seem manageable. Elijah had looked up to his dad so much. His dad was the one who had shown him how to navigate the world of science, how to look at the stars and see them as possibilities. That night, Elijah had taken a NASA folder from his dad's desk to his room. He laid it on the bed like a treasure and asked, "Can I show them this at school?" His dad had smiled and said, "You don't need the folder, Elijah. All you need is your voice. Just tell them what I do and tell them you're proud." Elijah had been hesitant, though. "What if they don't believe me?" he asked. His dad had shrugged and said, "If they laugh, you keep your head up. The truth doesn't need applause." Elijah, it just needs to be said. But in that moment, when Elijah had shared the truth with his class, the laughter and doubt had shattered his confidence. He had crumpled the picture of his dad holding a rocket ship and shoved it into the bottom of his backpack. That simple, cruel moment from Mrs. Thompson had left him feeling small, like maybe the world was right in dismissing him. Maybe his dad's work wasn't as important as he thought. Little did he know, the day was far from over. The rest of the morning crawled by for Elijah. He sat quietly at his desk, hands folded in his lap, trying to keep his mind from wandering to the feeling of embarrassment that had settled deep inside him. He could hear the other students chatting, laughing, and sharing stories about their parents, but it all felt distant, as though he was listening to a world that no longer felt familiar. Every now and then, he would glance at Mrs. Thompson, who seemed unaware of the impact of her words, focused entirely on the class as though nothing had changed. But for Elijah, everything had changed. His confidence, which had been soaring just hours earlier, had now crumbled to dust. He kept wondering, what if Mr. Denton was right? What if my dad's job isn't important enough? What if I'm just imagining it? These questions had begun to settle in the back of his mind like a slow poison, one that was hard to shake. He didn't want to believe the doubt creeping in, but the laughter in the room had left an indelible mark. The rest of the day passed in a blur, with Elijah barely participating in any of the activities. His classmates seemed unaware of his inner turmoil. Chloe's mom had brought cupcakes for the class, and Thomas's uncle, a mechanic, had brought in tire pressure gauges, passing them around the room like they were treasures. Elijah could hear the clapping and laughter, but he felt disconnected from it all. His stomach churned with nerves, his mind stuck on the thought of his dad walking through that door. No, it wasn't just that. It was what happened if he didn't. What if his dad didn't show up? What if it really was a joke, like Mr. Denton had suggested? The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, and the final hour of Career Week presentations drew nearer. Elijah kept checking the door, his heart racing every time someone passed it, or when he thought he saw movement in the hallway. He glanced at the clock again. It was almost 1:30 p.m. The last 4 parents would be called in soon. Elijah's nerves were palpable. What if his dad didn't make it on time? He could already imagine the scene. The last person to come in would be him. Mr. Denton would look at him, confused, and Elijah would be left standing there, his pride shattered even more than before. Mrs. Thompson had already moved on to the next parent, a woman who owned a bakery and handed out little cookies in the shape of business cards. The students clapped for her and asked questions, but Elijah couldn't focus on any of it. His palms were sweaty, and his knees bounced nervously under his desk. The thought of hearing Mr. Denton's sarcastic remarks again filled him with dread. Just when Elijah thought the minutes couldn't stretch on any longer, the door to the classroom opened. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a grand entrance. There were no dramatic gasps, no applause, just the soft sound of the door opening and a quiet, steady step into the room. There, standing in the doorway, was his father, Jonathan Carter, in a navy blue blazer and a white dress shirt, his NASA badge clipped to the breast pocket of his jacket. His presence filled the room in an instant, but it wasn't with a loud, showy declaration. It was a quiet power, a calm confidence that no one could ignore. Elijah's heart leapt, and he shot up from his seat so fast that his chair scraped noisily against the tile. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. All he could do was stare at his dad, standing there with a calm smile and an easy presence, surveying the room as if he belonged there. "Hello?" Carter said, his voice warm and steady. I'm Carter. I designed spacecraft." And just like that, the whole room seemed to freeze. The kids sat frozen in their seats, their eyes wide with shock. It wasn't the laughter, the disbelief, or the sarcastic comments that had followed Elijah's words earlier. This time, it was realization. The silence was thick, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. The kids stared at the man standing at the front of the classroom, the man Elijah had always looked up to, the man who worked at NASA, the very same NASA that some of them had dismissed with a laugh just hours before. Elijah couldn't believe it. His dad was here, his dad had shown up, he wasn't late, he hadn't canceled, and now he was standing in front of the class, quietly commanding attention without saying a word about the ridicule Elijah had faced earlier. His dad didn't need to speak about it. He didn't need to make a big deal of it. His mere presence was enough. Elijah's gaze didn't leave his father. For the first time all day, he felt his shoulders relax. He sat back down slowly, feeling his body settle into the chair with an unexpected weight of pride that had been absent earlier. It was like the world had stopped spinning for a second. His dad, the man who made rockets communicate with Earths, was standing in front of his classmates. Carter didn't need to boast or show off. He simply walked to the front of the room, nodded politely at Mrs. Thompson, and faced the class with an easy smile. "Are you guys learning about jobs today?" he asked, his tone light and engaging. A hand shot up from the back of the room, and a young boy asked, "Do you fly rockets?" Dr. Carter chuckled softly. "Not quite," he said with a smile. "I help build the systems that allow rockets to talk to us after they leave Earth. Think of it like this. Spacecraft need phones, and we build the phones. Space iPhones," another student asked, raising her hand eagerly. Carter smiled again. "Sure, but with really bad reception." The room rippled with laughter. Elijah couldn't help but smile. The tension from earlier fading into the background as he watched his dad work his magic in front of the class. His father wasn't just giving a presentation. He was teaching them something real. He was making space exploration tangible, understandable, and most importantly, fun. Elijah noticed how the students leaned in, eyes wide with interest, asking more questions about how communication with Mars worked and what it was like to build technology that allowed them to talk to robots on another planet. One by one, they asked questions. Their curiosity piqued, their skepticism about Elijah's dad slowly turning into admiration. But the shift in the room wasn't just about the kids' newfound respect. It was about Elijah himself. For the first time all day, he wasn't the kid who had been laughed at. He wasn't the one who had been doubted. He was the one whose dad had walked into the room and made the impossible seem completely real. Mr. Denton stood to the side, clipboard in hand, his usual confidence now gone. He watched Dr. Carter with a kind of unease in his eyes, unable to fully process what had just happened. It wasn't just the words Dr. Carter was saying, it was the way he was saying them. There was a quiet strength in the way he stood, in the way he spoke. It was a strength that Elijah had always known, but had never been able to fully express to others. Just before wrapping up, Carter paused, his eyes scanning the room as he looked at Elijah. "By the way," he said casually, "I heard someone earlier say that working at NASA might be unrealistic." The room grew quieter as the kids waited for what he would say next. Dr. Carter turned to Elijah and smiled. "Well," he said, "I guess some people have a different definition of realistic." The room fell silent. Then, the quietest murmur of admiration spread among the students. For the first time that day, Elijah felt his heart swell with pride. He wasn't just sitting in the back of the room anymore. He was sitting beside his dad, beside a man who was real, who was respected, and who had just proven to everyone in the room that Elijah had told the truth all along. And for Elijah, that moment was everything. As Dr. Jonathan Carter finished his talk, he clicked a button on the screen, showing a photo of the Mars Relay Project. The image displayed satellites floating in deep orbit around Mars, an intricate web of technology making communication possible between Earth and the rover. Elijah looked at the picture with pride, knowing exactly how much effort had gone into the work, how many sleepless nights his dad had spent ensuring everything worked perfectly. This, Dr. Carter said, his voice soft but firm, is how we stay connected to robots on another planet. We make sure they can call home. It's a big responsibility, and a small mistake could cost a lot. The room was now completely still. Even the class clown, usually the first to make a joke or disrupt a lesson, sat quietly, captivated by the images on the screen and the story Dr. Carter told. The students leaned forward in their seats, their eyes fixed on him, as though they were seeing something for the first time, an actual connection to the universe that didn't feel so far away anymore. But for Elijah, it wasn't just the lesson on Mars and satellites that mattered. It was the moment his dad had walked into the room and quietly, without fanfare, proved that what he had said was true, that Elijah wasn't the one with the exaggerated imagination. It was the others who had underestimated him. Dr. Carter wrapped up his presentation with a warm smile. "I've got to head back," he said. Mars doesn't like to be kept waiting. The class chuckled again, and for the first time, Elijah felt the weight in his chest lift. His dad wasn't just a man who worked at NASA. He was someone who had earned the respect of others, not by bragging, not by trying to prove himself, but by simply showing up and sharing the truth. As Dr. Carter headed for the door, he paused, turned around, and looked at the class one more time. His gaze shifted to Elijah, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. Without missing a beat, Dr. Carter spoke to the class, his voice calm and deliberate. "I hope your teachers always make sure you feel heard," he said, "especially the ones who dream big." The words hung in the air for a moment longer, and Elijah could see the looks of realization on the faces of his classmates. The doubts, the laughs, the disbelief, they were all gone now. They had seen the truth for themselves. They had seen what it meant to dream big, to reach for something greater than what others thought was possible. Elijah walked toward the door, his dad's words echoing in his mind. For the first time all day, he stood taller. He didn't have to prove anything to anyone. He didn't need the validation of others to know who he was. His dad had walked into that room, not just as an engineer, but as a symbol of perseverance and belief in the impossible. As Elijah left the classroom, he felt something shift within him. His dad had given him the gift of standing up for the truth, no matter who doubted him. The world would always have people who wanted to put limits on what he could achieve, but his dad had just shown him that those limits didn't have to define him. Elijah could dream big, just as big as anyone else, because the truth he carried didn't need to be hidden anymore. Back in the staff lounge, Mrs. Thompson sat by herself for a while after Dr. Carter's departure. She hadn't said a word when he had left, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Elijah wasn't the same kid he had been when he walked in that morning. The shift in the room had been subtle but undeniable. It wasn't just that Dr. Carter had proven Elijah's story true. It was that the entire class had been reminded of the power of truth, of dreams, and of seeing people for who they truly were, not for the box others tried to put them in. The next morning at school, the atmosphere had changed. Elijah noticed it immediately. As he walked through the hallways, students who had once laughed at him now smiled politely, offering small nods of respect. One boy, who had once mocked him, now asked if his dad had ever met an astronaut. Another student asked if Elijah could bring one of his dad's space tools to school for show and tell. But it wasn't about the attention. It wasn't about the curiosity or the respect that suddenly seemed to surround him. Elijah had learned a more profound lesson from his dad that day. It was about being confident in your own truth, regardless of who believed it. It was about holding your head up, no matter who laughed, and never shrinking for anyone. And that was exactly what he did. He walked through the halls with his head high, not because he wanted to prove something, but because he knew something. At lunch, Mila, the quiet girl who had whispered, "I believe you," earlier, walked beside him. "They believe you now?" she said, grinning. Elijah shrugged. "They didn't have to," he said, but he couldn't help but smile back at her. It felt good to be seen, truly seen for who he was, not for what others assumed. In the classroom, as the day wrapped up, Elijah found a folded note in his cubby. It was from Mr. Denton, the teacher who had made him feel small just hours earlier. The note wasn't typed, wasn't formal. It was just a simple, handwritten apology. "Jalen, I was wrong. You shouldn't have had to prove anything to us. Keep dreaming big. Denton." Elijah didn't smile. He didn't need to. He read the note once, then folded it back up and slipped it into his backpack. It wasn't about the apology. He didn't need it, but maybe someone else needed to write it. That afternoon, as the final bell rang, Elijah walked out of the classroom with his head high, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. He had found his voice, not through validation from others, but through standing firm in his own truth. And as he walked through the crowded hallways, a new understanding settled in his chest. He had been given a gift. The world might try to limit his dreams, but as long as he carried the truth with him, his path would always be his to create. As for Mr. Denton, he stood by his desk for a long moment after the students had left. The room was quieter than usual, and for the first time in a long while, he found himself reflecting on what had just happened. He hadn't just been wrong about Elijah's dad, he had been wrong about Elijah, too. And the lesson he had learned wasn't just about respecting kids. It was about respecting dreams. Because when you dismiss someone's dreams, you risk silencing their voice. And when you silence their voice, you silence everything that makes them unique, powerful, and worth listening to. As the school year continued, the echoes of that day stayed with everyone at Maplewood Academy. And for Elijah Carter, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. One where he stood, tall and proud, his dad's legacy with him every step of the way.